So this is also me on the screen. So I'm Kate Worthington, and I run a mountain activities business up here in Snowdon in North Wales called RAW Adventures. And among many other aspects of our business, we manage and coordinate the official recce events for the Dragon's Back race. We're an event partner to RAW Events, and I've been hosting recce events for the Dragon's Back race in 2019, 2021, and also for the 22 race as well. What else does RAW do? And who are Team RAW? So you might end up here or see me referring to kind of Team RAW. And who is Team RAW? Well, I've got a great bunch of sort of colleagues and friends really that work with me on RAW Adventures official recce events. Some of you will have met some of these folk before, possibly from events in previous years, or maybe seen them working on the event team for the Dragon's Back race. But we've got a mixture of males and females, and actually a majority of female running guides actually. So from your top left, I'm hoping that's the same for you. I've got Becky. Becky ran in the race last year. Mike, he's running the race a couple of years ago. Got Lou Beadleston, she's training to run in the race this year. We've got Jo Faulkner, who's running like 4 of the races since like 1992. Jade in the middle, Katie Cole, who ran in the race in 29. Tim Laney, who also ran in the race in 2019. And myself, and I ran in the race last year in 2021. So these folk and myself are going to be working over the summer. So depending on what date that you might be booked on, you will see one, if not 1, 2 or 3 of us on any given date. So really, really fortunate to kind of work with an awesome set of people with a resounding breadth of experience in kind of the mountains in lots of different contexts, as well as a lot of running, mountaineering as well, and specifically with experience with the Dragon's Back race, either running in it or working on the event team as well. So really good for answering questions and absorbing lots of kind of knowledge and hints and tips and gossip. And RAW Adventures as a business, we also get involved in, and you can probably see hi Alex from Portsmouth on my screen. Hi Alex from Portsmouth. We also run kind of winter mountaineering courses, running guiding courses, and I specialise in sort of guiding and recceing for Paddy Buckley rounds, the Welsh 3000s, and generally kind of introducing folk to running in kind of more mountainous technical terrain. And as a business, we also get involved in a lot of event safety support, designing routes for other organisers, risk assessments, kind of providing safety staff and medical support. So we're good at kind of organising logistics on the back end as well. And me personally, I have worked quite extensively with RAW Events and on the Dragon's Back race team in various roles, putting up big blue tents, looking after the welfare of the event team themselves, as a member of the first response team, also working behind the scenes, liaising with landowners and recceing bits of the route, course wrangling as it's called, which entails kind of fixing things on the course to make it run really smoothly, be that kind of landowner issues or practical issues. Yeah, so if there's like little bits of the 2021 route that might have been new for last year, I might have had a hand in kind of prepping those and sussing them out, don't blame me. So you probably are aware of some of the history of the Dragon's Back route, but it all started off in 1992, and here we have the winning pair, Helen Diamantidis and Martin Stone. Only 40 runners finished in that first year in 1992, and they were usually paired up. There's only a people that finished as a single folk. And then it ran from Conwy Castle in North Wales to a lovely castle called Cardigan Castle near Llandilo in South Wales. So not quite the full route that you will be doing in 22 this year. Not quite sure how I get hi Alex from Portsmouth off my screen, and I'm not sure if you can actually see that. I can see it, so I'm presuming that you can see it as well. So apologies for that. If anyone has an idea, they can pop it in the chat box. So on to 2012. This is the year that Shane Oley from RAW Events got involved and resurrected the race, if you like, on its 20th anniversary. And he also made it that much harder by chucking in all of the Welsh 3000s summits, 15 of them in day one. Some of them have been removed since then, you'll be pleased to know, because it did get a bit bonkers apparently. And that also ran from Conwy Castle in the north, which is this picture on the left, to Cardigan Castle in South Wales. And then we went on to, oh, excuse me. There was also editions in 2015. The winner of the women's race was Jasmine Paris. The winner of the men's race was Jim Mann. 2017 and 2019, the event is growing in size. Now, I'm not sure if you can see these stats now, because I've got my Alex from Portsmouth. But interestingly, if you can see the growing numbers from 2015, 142 people started, 65% of them finished, and the race numbers are growing and growing and growing. 2019, 402 people started, 251 finished, 62% finishing rate. That's a really good, yay, thank you so much. I'm not quite sure how I would have admined that from my side, but we've sort of disappeared the wording now. So thank you for that. I wasn't sure how to do it at my end, but now I can see my screen, and so can other people possibly. So we had 402 people started in 2019, 62% finishing rate. 2021, the hottest year ever on record since records began, I think, for the Dragon's Back race. 367 people started, a little bit down on expected numbers due to COVID getting in the way, and a lot of folk weren't able to travel, especially from overseas. So that kind of decimated the start line numbers a little bit. But the finish rate was pretty staggering at only 24%. Only 90 people finished. That was quite prolific actually. The heat on the first 2 days, I think, did wipe more people out than really it, other years. So yeah, hard going, I think, the 2021 race. Interestingly, and just a note for myself, I'm also interested to note how the percentage of female entrants in the race, which was kind of steadily climbing, you could argue. And then actually we had quite a small number of females joining in the 2021 race. And I also think that was to do with possibly international females not being able to get over to start the race as well. So yeah, interesting stats there. So yeah, 2021, a really hot race. The heat of the day, mostly, sort of about 1 o'clock was like the worst, when a lot of people were going over Trivan, which is the mountain in the background here. And then this is actually Becky Penrose, so one of our RAW run guides. This is her climbing up the screes after Trivan, and as you get up onto the Glithereye kind of massif between Trivan and Snowdon, basically, but hot weather. So what are you in for Dragon's Back Race 2022? Well, as you can see here, this is probably what you're expecting. 6 days of September weather, which hopefully won't be as hot as 2021. An average of 38 miles a day. So not massive distances in terms of great ultra distances that some of you might be used to running it all in one go, which is an amazing feat in itself. But I think the accumulation of these these mileages and the ascents, which are certainly tipping over 3,000 meters of ascent, certainly on days 1 and 2, and the accumulation of that day after day after day is also no mean feat. And you know you've got checkpoints to dib on certain summits and locations, and it's not necessarily marked course, but you know you've got a GPX file and a really good race map to follow. Think of it as a journey from North Wales to South Wales. I'm not sure I can think of it as a race, to be honest. So I struggle calling it a race, maybe an event or a journey. That's how I like to think of it. And also think of it as a time where you're going to share a lot of experiences with other people, especially with the camping overnight. So a whole experience in itself, like a whole 6-day experience. This isn't just a race, is it? It's something bigger and more exciting and profound than that as well. So it's the skills required are going to, rely on your kind of self-reliance in the mountains, what mountain experience you may have or that you're building up to have, looking after yourself, your safety, and also how you look after yourself in camp, and taking on food and drink in camp and on the hill, etc. So it's there's a lot going on, isn't there, for those 6 days. So where do the official recce events come into all of this? So on the right here, it's just a list of things that we include in the cost that you would pay to join a recce event, and we do try and keep the costs pretty reasonable. But having said that, there's a lot of time and effort and kind of practicalities and inclusions that go into our recce events. Oh, and also you'll get a free multi-wrap. I'm not allowed to call it a buff because they aren't officially made by Buff, but hey, common parlance, it's kind of like a buff. It gets called a multi-wrap, and it's got names of key locations all along the Dragon's Back race route from day 1 to day 6. So you get a free one of those. So yeah, we'll include all the planning, the recceing, the staffing, transport solutions, which is a biggie in terms of logistical faff. So that might include a separate driver, big enough vehicles to kind of move people around, use of buses when we can use buses. We'll take photos and we'll share all those photos with you. And you can join our WhatsApp group for official Dragon's Back recce events. But I do know there's loads of like WhatsApp groups flying around. So anyway, you could join that one as well. But of course, there's lots of others to join as well. And actually, the great thing is that as communication broadens year on year in terms of more people using more tools for communication, it's actually easier than ever to kind of hook up with folk to get out training and get out running and get out recceing. So actually, that's a real bonus of prepping for the race in this current time as opposed to kind of 10 years ago, say. So we our recce events are usually 1 day or 2 days. We've got a couple of dates this year that involve accommodation included. We weren't able to offer those during 21 because accommodation was still under quite tight restrictions for COVID regulations. But this year we've got a couple of dates, April and July, where we've got accommodation included. But we'll usually meet in an outside location, gather together, have a group introduction, a group briefing, check everyone's kit and equipment, check the route that we're doing, check the weather, and either use transport to kind of gain a start location that's away from us and then run back to our meeting point, or run from our meeting point and get picked up at the other side, depending on the nature of the route. And there's lots of opportunities to kind of work with others, looking through the maps, checking locations, just kind of getting your eye on the route itself and the landscape around you, asking lots of questions, and becoming more familiar with people and places as you move through the routes and questions. And usually we'll get a variety of weathers. Yeah, we had snow in May in 2019, which was all quite fun on the Rhinogydd. And floods as well. I think that was March 2019 as well. The ladies in their hoods there. We had a really flooded day on day 2 as well. But having said that, the fact that we've encountered some pretty epic weather on some of our recce events, as you might have done on some of your training runs as well, is actually really good for practicing using your kit in anger. And between us as a team, the RAW running guys, we've got really good route knowledge of where the GPX file takes us, but all the kind of little intricacies of best lines through technical terrain, and also some suggestions on other routes that work, that don't work, you know, in terms of taking yourself off the GPX line and sussing out little shortcuts, although they're not necessarily shortcuts, but we sometimes test out lines and split into 2 groups, and one group will test out one line and one group will test out the other, meet at the trigger point at the top and go, oh, what was that like for you? We were about a minute quicker. Oh, that was really rubbish because it was really boggy and heathery. But anyway, so lots of fun to be had. And obviously we do put a lot of focus onto the movement skills on sort of more technical terrain. It's no wonder that probably our most popular dates are over Crib Goch and terrain on day 1, because sometimes that's sort of the terrain that folk feel they might want a little bit more input on, and then maybe it's terrain that might be new to them as well. So we're really happy to share as much knowledge as we have to help folk in terms of developing movement skills as well. So, and then we come on to the delightful ridge of Crib Goch. And this is a really lovely image. This is taken from just really the point at which we've just dibbed at the dibber at the top of the East Ridge. And then you have this beautiful ridge extending before you. And it is in that weather as well. That's the perfect example. So this is a very, it's very slender, rocky ridgeline, kind of formed by glaciers carving out huge areas of rock to its right and its left, sort of 10,000 years ago in the last ice age. You'll see these kind of white little bits of rock here. That's quartz as well, and also the rock has a slightly pinky tinge to it, and that's because it has a lot of copper ore and iron ore in it as well. So Crib Goch literally means kind of ridge red in Welsh, so that's what it's describing. And it forms the one half of the Snowdon horseshoe, which you might have heard about, which encompasses Crib Goch, Snowdon itself, which is this peak behind, and then the rest of the range going over a mountain called a Llwyth, which the Dragon's Back race route goes over as well. And that, if you were to walk that in a day, you could say that you've done the Snowdon horseshoe, which is a really fine mountain walk. And the ridge of Crib Goch is defined as like a grade 1 scrambling route, and that means that you definitely have to start putting kind of hands to rock, and it involves some very simple kind of rock climbing moves to gain certain aspects of the rock at times. But it's described as a scramble, not a climb, because there's never anywhere that's particularly sustained and steep that you would then think about using climbing equipment for. So the route is very broken, and there's elements of walking in between some of the more technical scrambling sections. And just labeling up this bit here, so you can see like the narrow ridge ahead of you. This is stretching out before you as you stand on the checkpoint at the top of the East Ridge, it's called. So once you've climbed up to what people think is the top of Crib Goch, well, it's sort of like the top of the East Ridge, and then you have this traverse to make. And just where my cursor is about here, that's probably like the narrowest part of the ridge. And there's the actual summit of the mountain. It's just here with the arrow. This nice ledge to stand on is really good for photos. It's really comfortable and wide. And as you can see, the route progresses all along here, and there's still some scrambling and interesting rocks to be had over here. And then there's another little scramble section here, which looks quite steep initially. I've got a photo of that soon. Before you get up to the next checkpoint, Garnith-Ugain, and then it's an easy run down and up to the railway, up to Snowdon here. But this part here is probably what everyone thinks of when they think of the narrow part of Crib Goch. So just sense of scale, really, people on the ridge. So this is on the kind of the narrowest, one of the narrowest parts of the ridge. Lovely, calm and sunny weather. These are folk from a recent recce. It looks quite wet, doesn't it? The rock looks wet. It's a bit windy, it's a bit cloudy, hoods are up, jackets are on. Not the most pleasant of conditions, but not too windy, actually, you know, manageable. So, you know, the group got across quite fine. You just wasn't in the nice, perfect sunny conditions where all the nice photos are. The ridge itself, the slimmest part of the ridge, is about 600 meters in total. So it's not super long, that kind of the skinny section, if you like. But it will take you, you know, a good 45, 50 plus minutes to go from one checkpoint on the top of the East Ridge to the top of Garnith-Ugain here. But there's only 600 meters of skinny bit. So let's backtrack a bit. This is actually looking up from Bulchimoch, where the path junction splits. So you've left Pen-y-Pass, you've had some water at Pen-y-Pass, and you ascend towards Crib Goch using the pig track. So big, wide, engineered path, really kind of, I say easy going. Doesn't feel easy, but it's a wide path and super easy in terms of kind of navigating yourself up there. And you get to a junction at Bulchimoch, and you specifically have to turn right uphill, and you're faced with this hillside above you. And it gets progressively rockier and rockier. Initially, this red line is following just a kind of slightly messy mountain path, bits of scree, bits of loose rock. But there's cairns, you know, it's like a well-traveled route, and you can work your way up here quite nicely. And especially on race day, as it were, there'll be people ahead of you, people behind you. So you get a kind of a little progression of folk coming up through here. And then there's this steeper rock band ahead of you, and you look up to it and you go, I can't really see a way through that. And that's kind of fair enough when you're looking at it for the first time. And this is where you get the steeper scrambling. And then once you've broken through that middle rock band, which is like this red line, a bit of a zigzag journey, you're out on the higher area of the East Ridge, and it becomes more blocky and triangular rocks in nature. And I've got a photo of that in a minute. But when I was talking about simple scrambling moves, you'll find most of those in this rock band ahead of you. So here on the left, this is what I'm saying about what I'm referring to in terms of the rock band. So it's the first time that you're greeted with some steeper rock to negotiate. And my advice to folk is always kind of to be looking for the slightly worn areas of rock where you can quite clearly see where my arrow is going. You can quite clearly see that lots and lots of feet have traveled through these areas because of the color of the rock. So when we're actually on the hill, we can usually see that the way to go is usually the areas that are lighter in color, because the passage of feet have eroded the kind of the top layer, the sort of the lichenous top layer of the rock away. So the rock is quite clean underneath. So that's a really good thing to be looking out for when you're looking up at the rock. And you get yourself into kind of a series of kind of ledges and grooves. There's quite steep ground all around you, but there's definitely a way to go. And I have to say that also, don't forget that there is a great set of event sort of safety staff team up on Crib Goch. So along your progression on Crib Goch, you'll probably pass 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 different people who are working as part of the mountain safety team for the Dragon's Back race. So at strategic points, there are also a few folk just kind of dotted around, and they're great for a bit of kind of verbal reassurance and reminding folk of where they can go. So that can be really helpful for folk as well. Once you're above that kind of middle rock band, the terrain kind of changes in nature, slightly less in terms of kind of steepness, but you are a bit more exposed in terms of the slopes now kind of running away from you right and left. And the best place to stay, like these folk are in the photos, is kind of on the crest of this ridge. So you can see here that folk are neither to the right or to the left here. They are kind of on the crest of the ridge, which probably feels the most exposed, but it's also where the rock is the most secure. Anything to the right or the left starts getting a little bit looser and a little bit more weather worn. So the crest is best. And yeah, using hands whenever you can. So you don't have to be tiptoeing up, just using your feet. You can always use your hands to steady yourself as well. And just a note on steady progression. Smaller steps are more efficient and they make you feel more secure rather than big steps up this section of rock. As I said, hands really useful. This was a crossing that running guide Lou made with these chaps, and it was actually a bit breezy that day. Not too hazardous in terms of high wind speeds that were going to cause risk to them, but just breezy enough that they wanted to be in dynamic body position more and kind of a slightly lower on the ridge. Hands were useful, gloves are on, jackets are on, because once you're up on that ridge, if it's chilly temperatures, winds, rain, you're actually suddenly quite exposed, and there's nowhere worse in trying to kind of faff with any kit once you're then up on that ridge. So I would always suggest that once you're starting up Crib Goch, or just having dibbed in at the east ridge before you travel along the slim part of the ridge, which is this area on the right hand side of this photo, if you need to layer up, this is probably a good time to do so, because it's a bit faffy trying to stop halfway along the ridge to do so. And then once you have completed the kind of the narrowest part of the ridge, you come to these 3 pinnacles of Crib Goch, and they're quite clearly visible on the skyline of Crib Goch. Pinnacle 1 and Pinnacle 2, you can actually bypass them to the left. If people are looking for like a longer scramble route along the ridge, you know, some people will choose to go up and over the first pinnacles and the second pinnacles. No one in the race does that. They just stick to the faster lines underneath to the left. The 3rd pinnacle, however, there is an option of where you might choose to go. Now, interestingly, so on this photo on the left, this is me standing up here. This is with a group of walkers doing the Welsh 3000s actually, but I just chose this photo because it highlights this kind of staircase of scrambling that you can get up and over the 3rd pinnacle on. Now, interestingly, the mountain safety team, you will see someone standing up here, probably like a little bit about where I am. And a lot of folk move up this ridge and then they meet the safety team at the top, have a chat, and then pop down the other side. And that is a very obvious way to go. And these steps that these people are on here, really big, wide steps, like you're climbing up Jenga blocks. You just have to note that it's very exposed to the right here. what some people do is, rather than climbing up and over where I am and down again, some people kind of scoot round this ledge here, which is also doable, but very exposed. So I don't necessarily recommend folk do that, especially if you get if you're sensitive to exposure behind you, because there is hundreds and hundreds of meters of exposure behind you there. So up and over through this little cleft is nice, and the mountain safety team prefer folk to come up and over. They'll call you that way, basically. So it's a nice way to go. On our recce events, we have also, on certain weather days where it's good conditions, dry conditions, we've also explored a little kind of detour around the third pinnacle, which does entail going down, 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 losing a little bit of height, and then using this shoulder to kind of scoot around the third pinnacle, which is all the way up here. Not many people will use that on race day, to be fair. And there is a bit of an increased hazard of possibly kind of slightly looser ground. And that's why the mountain safety team usually beckon people up here, which is right, nice and secure, scrambling. But we have used this on recce days, and we've kind of talked about either or, and we've explored it as an option, so people at least had it in their mind's eye. And then some people on race day did go up here anyway, because lots of other folk were going up here, and they liked the fact that they were scrambling up towards the mountain safety team. So that's something that we've discussed on race day. And something else to think about is, just as you're kind of coming along this kind of ground, it's also thinking about, as I said, your layers, what you're wearing, protection from the elements, from any weather that you're having, be it hot or cold or rain. And you breathe a sigh of relief. You've kind of come up and over the third pinnacle, and you descend onto like a really lovely runnable trail for a little bit. It undulates, a few kind of rocky crests, and then you come to this on the left here. This is the scrambling section that gets you up towards the next checkpoint, Garnith Gain. And you get to this point and you're like, what the frick? Where does this go? So at this point, you're looking up at this big bulge of rock, and it looks like there's some really nice little easy paths that descend off to the left and avoid it completely. But actually, they don't really go anywhere, and they've just been created by lots and lots of people descending to the left, wanting to avoid this mess. And then the paths just descend into nothing. And then you have to kind of either come all the way back to this point, or you end up kind of going, well, I'm just going to fudge a route up here, which is sometimes and most usually possible, but you're on quite kind of looser terrain. It's hard going, it's just annoying, it's slow, and there's some potential hazard, and you can get yourself into some quite nasty ground. So best to kind of come back to this point, have a look up at this crest of this ridge, and just think to yourself, right, I just need to stick to the crest of the ridge. And there's either a big athletic massive step up this boulder here, or you can just work your around a couple of zigzags, but always come back to this crest of this ridge, and you'll find a way through the boulders. Look out for the scratches and the erosion on the rock. And I think it's like climbing through kind of big massive Jenga blocks. It's nowhere as near as exposed as Crib Goch. It's actually really friendly. You feel quite encased in the rocks around you, and that feels quite comforting after Crib Goch. So as you see here on the right, big blocks of rock around you, some big steps to take. You will need arms and hands involved as well, but not as exposed. So yeah, hopefully this gives you a sense of what I mean by hands involved. A couple of steeper steps. This is the nature of the terrain, kind of nice bits of running, and then steeper blocks to negotiate, but actually quite fun, quite hands-on scrambling. I would definitely get your glucose levels up, because this type of body movement really kind of depletes the energy. your quads get involved, your arms get involved, your shoulders get involved, your calves get involved, everything gets involved just when you're feeling quite, you know, quite beat up from the day one that you've just done. So my advice on going over Crib Goch is definitely to keep your food and your drink levels topped up, and it will use up a lot of energy, both mentally and physically, getting over this sort of ground. And then you can see that there's a lovely flattening up here, and there's a little kind of trigger point and a dibber up here, and it's a real sign of relief when you get through all of this kind of rocky stuff and you're finally onto that checkpoint, and then you can run off through some slightly rocky path down to the railway line, which then takes you up to the summit of Snowdon, and it all feels kind of rather pedestrian and comforting, because you've got off of the technical stuff and you just need to kind of run up next to a train line up to the summit of Snowdon. No problem there. Okay, so what do we know about Crib Goch? We love Crib Goch. It is not. It's not. Hopefully, it won't be a barrier to people, and I think actually, the more you can get onto that kind of terrain, the more hopefully you can start to kind of take down those barriers that some people quite rightly have with regards to this particular section of the race. And having said that, there's hazards and there's consequence to moving on this sort of terrain, but I think with knowledge and kind of consideration, and also becoming more used to the skills and the movement skills that can help you on that kind of terrain, it's not something to be too nervous of, something to be respectful of, but not a deal breaker. Let's go. Yeah, so I can kind of open up the floor, as it were, for questions and things, and won't keep you for longer than probably just a little bit past 8 o'clock. Just go back to this picture of Crib Goch. Now, interestingly, and I didn't know this at the time, when I look back at the results for day one, I was the fastest. I was the second fastest female to cross Crib Goch, behind Katie Mills, who was the female, the only female that was faster than me. And that surprised me, actually, because I was maybe the 12th female to come in on day one, but I was the second sort of fastest female on Crib Goch. So my point out of that is that even though during the whole of the race that I did last year, I was never like the fastest. Coming in the evenings, I was quite, my pace was pretty steady on some days, especially the hot days, but due to the nature of being more comfortable on this kind of terrain, it meant that I could keep my average speed up when I was coming across more rocky ground, say like on Trivan and on Crib Goch, etc. as well. So I could actually probably say that I'm kind of more efficient moving on this sort of ground than I am running on kind of flatter ground, which is actually the inverse to other people's experience, where they can motor along on other terrain and I can't keep up with them. And yet this sort of ground might be quite challenging, and it can really. So I'm going to start. So I'm just going back through the chat and I can see some questions. So the first question that I can see is, yes, will we have access to the recorded session? Yes, I will probably edit it slightly because I have lots of ers and ums. I'm really good at that. So I'll edit it slightly and then share this for folk that haven't been able to attend. Jamie has asked, has wind ever caused a deviation around Crib Goch or anywhere else on the route? If that's in context of the race itself, not to date. So the race has had pretty fair conditions and no deviation has had to have been made to date on the race. If it was, then runners would be deviated along the pig track, which skirts underneath Crib Goch up to the summit of Snowdon. And on a couple of recce events, we have been going over Crib Goch because the wind was too strong, and it was definitely going to be a safety issue trying to keep people from not blowing off the mountain. So yes, we diverted across the Crib Goch as well. Sorry, we diverted across the pig track as well. Martin's asked, how are all the checkpoints on summits? Mostly. That there are some checkpoints that are kind of in the valleys, like at a specific gate or a style, in valley points as well. So, but mostly the checkpoints are at quite clear and logical summit locations. There's no kind of orienteering or navigation challenges in terms of where to find the checkpoint in that sense. Simon asks, would having a few sessions at the local indoor climbing or bouldering centre benefit for Crib Goch? Quite possibly, yes. As in to get used to kind of using your whole of your body, your arms and your legs. Why not give it a go? I would say anything that does enable you to kind of practice moving your body in a way that you're not used to, i.e. it's not running, is it? This isn't running. My goodness, there's not much running that goes on Crib Goch. Maybe a little bit of scampering fast over rocks where it's kind of convenient to do so. But yeah, think kind of climbing and climbing moves, and certainly getting your whole body involved. Yeah, and there's another question from Emily in terms of kind of weather conditions that might ask the race organisers to change the route. Wind, basically. So I think Shane has quite high tolerance levels for people's personal capacity to deal with wind and rain up to a certain extent. But the mountain safety team who are standing on Crib Goch, if the winds are getting very pushy and strong, then they have the capacity to call into race control and talk to them about kind of safety and judgment. So it will be wind, strong winds, or the mixture of strong winds and rain that would mean a safety decision is made about whether people go across Crib Goch or not. Wondering what wind speeds to train up to. Oh, okay. So wondering what wind speeds. So if you're looking at mountain weather forecasts and you know compared to a day that you want to be looking to recce Crib Goch, if your mountain weather forecast is giving you wind speeds anything sort of around 30 miles an hour, for me that's definitely a tipping point of like that's going to start to feel quite unsteady. And 30 miles an hour doesn't sound like very much, but it's definitely enough to be pushing on your body and causing you to feel unbalanced when you are on as little ground as you are on Crib Goch at times. So yeah, 30 miles an hour is sort of where my antennas start to kind of heighten, and then I start to look at kind of wind direction as well, and ground conditions, wet, dry, etc. And also personal tolerances. Some people are more happy to tolerate higher wind speeds than others, but there's definitely 30 miles an hour and above, pushing 40 miles an hour. It's just a skinny ridge with not much shelter, and it's not somewhere where I would like to be in really windy conditions. And future question from Ala. Will I be covering other sections of the route in future Zoom sessions? I may well do. I did cover some of day 2 in a Zoom session while we were in lockdown last year. So it's something, yeah, it's something that I think about. So you let me know if it's something that you find would be really, really useful. I don't think I could go through the whole route because it'd be quite time consuming and might be a little bit dull in places, but maybe highlights. Peter has asked, do I have any tips for the descent into camp on day 1? in terms of technically, really good lugs on your trainers, and maybe poles if you like using poles, and small steps, and just take it nice and light and steady. Whether it's in terms of route finding, pointing yourself downhill, down the fall line, 90 degrees to the contours, get yourself down to where all the trees are, and then kind of bear right, and then left, and then right. I can probably describe that better on a map. Jamie's asked, the checkpoint on Trivan, is it usually at the Adam and Eve rocks? So there's two very prominent rocks at the top of Trivan called Adam and Eve, if you may know of them, and the dibber is just at the bottom of those. So you don't have to go up onto those rocks at all, but look for those rocks, and that's where the dibber will be, at the bottom. And Claire has asked, where does the route go on Trivan? Well, as you leave the support point in the Ogwen Valley, the route ascends above the car park where the support point is, and it uses what's called the West Gully to ascend Trivan. So you don't have to go up the North Ridge at all, which is much longer. So the Dragon's Back route uses what's called the West Gully, which is essentially a water runoff from the side of the mountain. So in wet weather, it just pours with water like a small stream, but so it can get a bit damp in there. In 2021, it was like baking hot, and only one side of the gully was in the shade, so everyone was climbing up the walls on the shady side and just hiding from the sun, and it was super dry in there on that day, thank goodness. And then up and over the summit, and then down the south ridge of Trivan, your menu. And if you do have a question, then by all means, unmute yourself and be brave and shout it out. And you can also put it in the chat if you really want to.
I have a question, if I can be heard.
Hello, Jamie, I can hear you. I'm hoping other people can hear you as well.
Yeah, I think you're the one that matters. Hopefully you can, you're the one with the answers.
Sometimes not, but I will try. And if not, I'll ask my dog.
Okay, just a quick one. There is quite a lot of time between now and race day or event day in September, but I live in London, so it is a bit of a hassle to get over to Wales, especially in deepest, darkest Wales. So would you recommend a priority stage recce? So I've already had a look at stage one. I'm with you guys for stage two, but yeah, that's my question.
So you've looked at some ground on day one.
Yeah.
And you're going to go over day two, and
what's my priority next?
Day 5, maybe some of day 5. There's quite a lot of folk that are based in South Wales that you could probably get in touch with as well. But having an appreciation of some of the second half of day 5 after the Usk Reservoir, where it kind of roller coasters over virtually all of the hills in the Brecon Beacons. I think that could be a really worthwhile use of time. Not too far to get to from, say, London and the southeast. Quick pop along the M4. But I think that would really help to contextualize what the frick is going on day 5, which is a big, massive day. So if you had to look at any of day 5, I would maybe prioritize the section from maybe after the Usk Reservoir or going towards Story Arms and the Pen y Fan area, and just get used to some of the ground. It's really different in nature to the day 1 and day 2. Drier grass, sort of acid grassland, but steep in places. Steep like you don't want steep on day 5. So I think it's really good to have that knowledge in your belly when you're on race day, because you kind of know what's coming and you can kind of preempt yourself. You can prepare yourself, you can eat, you can drink, you know what's coming mentally.
Thank you. And a quick follow-up question. Sorry, just on just on footwear, because the terrain is very different from rocky Crib Goch to soggy bogs. So how would you vary it throughout the race? I mean, weather dependent.
Personally, I didn't. I had a pair of Sportiva Mutants that kind of did me for all the sorts of terrain that I met throughout the race. But having said that, if you did have a choice of trainers and you do have some favourites for more maybe rocky, drier terrain and more wetter, boggy terrain, then just something with a really good pair, or good lugs on the bottom. So for some of the second half of day 5 would really benefit from really kind of extra luggy pair of shoes, possibly. But having said that, the beginning of day 5, a lot of it's on road. So you might want a different pair of shoes for the beginning of day 5 that are slightly less luggy. It's really difficult to answer trainer questions because we're all so different. I personally found a pair of Sportiva Mutants did me for most of the terrain, well, all of the terrain, that I came across. And I was intending to wear a pair of Ultra Olympus for day 6, but I took myself off Penavan at the end of day 5, so I never got to day 6. I never used my Ultras. Sad face.
Thank you.
Can I take a question from Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I was just curious, in camp, what is the sort of go-to foods for people during the day? Mindful, I've just bought my is it the 59-litre dry bag?
Oh, yeah.
And by the time you've got a sleeping bag and a few other bits and pieces in it, there's not a lot of room left for sort of day-to-day stuff. I was just curious, in your experience, as to what people have sort of packed. I assume, obviously, you've got your race vest and you've got your halfway bag, but you know, having additional food that isn't available, because you can't take anything from camp on the day, can you?
No. So do you mean what sort of foods would you pack for each day's?
Well, just from your experience, what, you know, are there any nuggets that, you know, you think, oh, I've never thought of taking that? Because obviously, if it's 30 degrees like it was in 2021, you know, certain food groups aren't going to last as long.
So that's a good point, because I bagged up quite a bit of food, of things that I enjoyed eating that sort of spanned, you know, carbohydrates, protein, salty, sweet, complex carbohydrates, cream eggs, pepperonis, cheese, sweeties, my goodness, lots of variations of on the above. So I had like a sweet pocket and a savory pocket, so I could dip in and out depending on whether I wanted sweet or savory foods. But like you said, in terms of kind of weather and conditions, when it was so hot on day 1 and day 2, suddenly a lot of my food choices weren't the most appropriate. So I kind of kept delving into my kind of day 5 and day 6 bags and nicking all the gels and all the sweeties. So I just ended up rooting through my bags of food just to find what would work for me on those particular days. So having a choice of foods that you know work for you, and then obviously replenishing your race vest and your support point bag with a selection of those foods, but be aware that obviously you can also purchase foods from numerous shops on day 3 as you pass through Machynlleth, and also some shops that you pass on the beginning of day 5, and don't forget possibly the burger van at Story Arms if it's still open on day 5 as well. So there is capacity to kind of fill up on day 3, and that was some people's strategy. My strategy was to try and pack for the whole week, because I couldn't really be psyched with having to go shopping on day 3. I did actually go into a shop and buy some milk and some salty crisps, I think, and then I ate, and then I drank too much milk in one go and gave myself a tummy ache.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So are the shops on day 3 after the halfway point? As in, can you overload your?
Yeah. So you
I'm not suggesting you cheat.
You pass all the shops before you get to the support point on day 3. So some people are coming into the support point with like 2 bags of shopping, as if they've just done a week shopping, and then they'll spend like a whole process, the whole half an hour, either eating the food, trying to pack the food into their race vest, or trying to pack the food into their support point bag. It does all get a bit faffy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. All right, thanks for that.